I'm starting the day in the studio. I want to paint with oil pastels today, but I want to use baby oil. I've used different oils, linseed, walnut. I've noticed that they have a tendency to yellow a little bit, but we can talk about that in another video. I've never tried baby oil. It's a cheap option. I want to see how it reacts and how it dries, if it dries. Oh, and I want to tell you that in the next couple of weeks, I will attempt a realistic portrait with oil pastel. If you're interested in that video and you don't want to miss it, turn on notification. I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. I'd like to render something realistic and nice with oil pastel. I feel like it's gonna be really hard. I'm gonna paint a cactus and a nice terracotta pot, and that's it. Let's get set up. I'm using some sketching paper for this, but I made sure that it was thick enough, about 100 pounds. It's a 9x12. I feel like a larger format paper is easier for oil pastel just because the stick is kind of big, so to go in with little details is harder. So a larger format paper makes it easier to put in details. The main point would be to have something thick enough to handle some oil. I'll be using a whole array of oil pastel today, not necessarily one specific set. I'm gonna use a lot of greens. There'll be yellow, orange, tones of browns, and a little bit of black here and there. I'll be using baby oil with a stiff brush. So something with short bristles usually will be stiffer than a longer bristle brush. I also have Gamsol. It's a paint thinner that I use. It's odorless, but it's still toxic, so I handle it with care. But I use it to clean the brushes. Side note, I've also used Gamsol straight as a paint thinner in my drawing. It works really well. And a little pointy tool, a toothpick could do the job, just to scrape little areas. Sometimes it's always handy to have that. First, I want to go through the whole sketching process of the cactus, but if you're too curious and you want to go straight to the baby oil diluting, here it is. So the first thing I do is decide on the proportion. I decide on the page the limitations of where I want my pot to lay and where I want the cactus to go, to leave some kind of border around it, and how big I want the pot compared to the cactus. I'm going to be using really bold lines for you to see how I do it, and also different colors of lines. But in real life, I would probably go very lightly with my pencil so that it doesn't show up too much when I go with oil pastels. It's just that on camera, I have to make things bolder so that you can see what I'm doing. And if you struggle with sketching or drawing, you can tell yourself that initial sketches don't really have to be perfect. They could be kind of coarse, and you could fix things when you draw, as long as the bones are there, like the proportions are there. Even if there's like too many lines or the lines are kind of messy, you can erase as you go, and you can put pigments on top, and in the end it should look really nice. So this is the bottom of my pot. I will decide now how wide I want it to be. So I say, let's say I want it about this wide, right? And then if I go and I put a reference line here to the top of my pot, as I'm saying, it doesn't have to be precise. I know that a terracotta pot has an angle here. It comes wider, so I would put another dot here and about the same distance and a dot on the other side, and I would draw a line to meet with the bottom part here. Whoops. I'm holding the camera, so that's why my lines are shaky, but it really doesn't matter. The next bit would be to round off the bottom edge here, like this, like put a little rounding off. So you round off this part as well, very subtly. Same for the top here, you can round it off very, very subtly here. So you see that my initial line, both of the lines are not really precise. This is crooked, but we're gonna clean everything later on. The other bit that's very tricky is creating this circle here for the pot. We always have a tendency to make this really too big. So we have to think about it as a very elongated circle, but really squished down. So I would maybe think that it might go this big, but in reality it would be, for the perspective I'm going for, it would be something very thin like this here. So I will make this connect to each edge and kind of polish my line as I'm going. So this is a circle here like this. At this point I'm gonna clean up my lines. So here's the pot with all the lines cleaned up. And if we look at a terracotta pot like this, there are some that are like this one with no edge, but I think I want to create this kind of edging or lip around the band around the pot. I think it's interesting, so I'm going to create that right now. Again, I'm going to decide where it's going to go. Roughly, I could create like a thinner lip, a double lip, or like a fatter one, whatever I want. I think I want it maybe here. So I'm going to just follow this rounded angle, but at this height. Sorry if the camera is a bit shaky. So here, obviously, this border has to go over the pot on each side. So I just have to make all this a little bit bigger, thinking that this edge is gonna go over the pot basically on each sides. I can try to make them as symmetrical as possible. And clean up my lines again. So as you can see, my sketch is not perfectly neat. You see some of the lines here, but it doesn't matter. I can clean it up a bit more later. You just get the general idea here. As for the center of the pot, there is an edge here. So within this elongated circle, I'm going to draw a smaller elongated circle, leaving a little gap here all along the way, and that will be the border of the pot, which will be lighter when we draw it. And this here could be, actually I'm adjusting as I'm going, but this could be a little bit lower. Let me pick two different colors so that you see what I'm talking about. This will be the edge of the pot. It's just to give an indication that this top part has to be lighter, and fading it to a darker color here to give that impression of the edge of the pot instead of just having it like a flat edge. Now onto the cactus. Essentially, it's a very elongated shape going pointy at the top, and I decide how wide I want it in the pot and how centered it's going to be. So I'm deciding that it's going to be around here, roughly, and a cactus is not a regular shape, but like the general shape is gonna be like this. So I've rounded the cactus a little bit more, and I'm going to perfect it as I go along. The middle part has ridges like this. The needles, they come out of some kind of a yellow, light yellow circular shape. There are those rounded buds, let's say, all along here. There are some along this edge here, and a few showing up here. So let me draw those. They're not perfect circles, and they're different sizes as well. Also, I'm not trying to get a realistic effect, but more like an illustrative, expressive effect here. So that's why I'm not going very precisely. And I'm not really bothered by the fact that my lines are very shaky because I'm holding the camera at the same time. It's all gonna be okay once we add some pigment. I'm not gonna draw the needles right away. Now I wanna focus on the inside of the pot. There's some earth evidently. Here the cactus is gonna go in a little bit, and over this, I guess it's gonna hide this bit. There's gonna be some earth that will be all along here. Now I'm gonna clean up my sketch once more. There's a lot of sketch cleanup. I'm a messy sketcher, which is fine. I don't mind it. And once that's done, I'm gonna start putting some oil pastel down. Let's get into colors. Two things to remember. I use many different shades of the same color throughout. That helps give it more depth and make it more interesting and more organic. So for the little bits of yellow, green, orange and all that, you'll see me use a bunch of different shades of the colors, and that's how I get the more interesting feeling, as opposed to blocking one big color. You can do that if you want to, but it gives a very different result. So I disperse my pigment a little bit everywhere as I'm seeing things evolve, and then I go in with the baby oil to blend it all together. So first pastel, then baby oil. I'm gonna work my way from top to bottom so that I don't drag the pigment here with my hand. So I'm gonna work on the cactus first. I usually try to put down the lighter colors first. So I think I'm going to block in all the yellow first and then work on the green. With the edge of a dark green, I'm going to go over certain areas where things would be darker. So maybe the edges would be a little darker to give more definition, and also wherever there are dips in the cactus. Once I use the baby oil, it'll all blend in. I'm taking a more muted green here to go over certain areas and kind of define the different planes of the cactus. So whatever I want to protrude off the page will be lighter, and whatever are dips and things that go inward are darker. This looks really messy right now, but as I'm building up the pigment and then when I start blending, things are gonna come together. As you can see, I'm using a bunch of different shades of green, and I will adjust after a few blending bits, whatever I need more accentuated, lighter, darker, could be adjusted with very often white, although it's gonna make it more muted, but I don't mind that. And also with a dark green in this case, or maybe some brown. Here at the bottom, I'm putting some darker shade, and I plan to blend this into the cactus and fade it into a gradient here. I forgot these in the list of things we need. So an eraser helps pick up the crumbs, like this especially, on my nice white background. I want to try to not smear too much pigment. It's going to happen because it's oil pastel, but I'm going to try to minimize it and keep everything neat as I'm going. There's already a smudge here. Okay, let's start blending. Let's see if this works. It smells like babies. Okay, I think I might have too much. The smallest amount is really important, or else things move around and they don't dry, and you kind of have to stop drawing because everything gets too wet. And when I want to change colors, I'm using a little bit of Gamsol to clean my brush. I have to say that It blends very well. I'm surprised because I've never tried baby oil before, and it really works well. The question is, does it dry? Does it take a long time to dry? And does it affect the pigment once it is dry? The feel that I'm getting is a very blended kind of feeling and a bit muddy and washed out. I want to have it more defined and painterly with strokes, something more expressive. So while this dries, I will work on the other areas, blend everything in, and at the very end I'm gonna go back and add some highlights and some different textures. For the pot, I'll use different shades of yellow sienna, orange, maybe a little bit of red, and browns. It's going to be all mixed in. I'm gonna start with a lighter shade, maybe a wash of this shade as a first layer. I'm not saturating the paper, I'm just putting a very thin layer of this so that I could layer different shades on top and then blend everything in. I always start to blend in the lighter shade, going into the darker afterwards, just so that the dark doesn't bleed into the light. I'm also noticing that I really don't have to dip in for more oil very often. Just dip a little bit and I could go a long way. Now I want to try to go back in with dark colors to create some depth, so dark browns and blacks, and see how it goes. It's going to be my first time trying to add pigment after putting oil. Let's see how it turns out. I have a dark brown here. It does work. Going back to add pigment after oil was put for blending is a lot more difficult than directly pigment on pigment, and you can't put as many layers for sure. But I feel like for specific paintings like portraits, especially when you want to really have skin tone blended seamlessly, it's a really good tool to use. I don't find that this oil, the baby oil, makes the page that oily. It bled through a little bit, but really not too much. But for example, here I would like to build up a bold line and like really put pigment here. And it's a little bit harder to build up the pigment. If I use a Syndia, which is a lot creamier, let's see how they do. So this is supposed to be very creamy and okay. So yeah, with a soft oil pastel on top, it would help things a lot more. I'm seeing that when blending with oil, you have to either blend specific areas where you'll keep things very blended and not go back in to add more pigment, because that's kind of tricky. Or you need to have a very buttery oil pastel like Syndia if you want to go over those areas where you used oil. But it really works. It works well. I like the fact that it's not toxic because it's baby oil. It smells nice. Keeping it to like a very little amount really helps. And it doesn't make it very goopy. Like I touch my paper and it's not very oily at all. The only real question is, because it's not meant as an art material, is it archival? Will, after a few years, will it alter and kind of break up the pigment? I don't know. There's no way to really tell. So I would be careful using it in works that maybe I want to sell just for those reasons, or I would do a deeper research. But for studies and for working for myself on different sketches and drawings, I would keep on using it, honestly. It's super cheap. It smells really nice. The last step is to do the needles on this little guy. Using a really well sharpened pencil, I'm gonna do them kind of all willy-nilly in many different directions, sizes. Doesn't have to be precise, of course. I wonder if using this for the ones that are inside, yeah, we can create highlights in certain areas with this. So I would probably alternate between the pencil and like a toothpick to create highlights on the needles like this. I would do both. I personally like to go in with a pencil and add some line just because I like a strong contour line, but it's really a stylistic decision. Some people really don't like this. Like, you can even go back and define some edges throughout. Oil pastel is really not the easiest material to work with. It's convenient because you get the pop of color and it's portable. There's no real setup. So if you want to work outside or really fast or whatever, that's the fun part of it. But trying to control it is really hard. That's why I prefer to work in a more expressive way with it, because I don't want to work against it. I just go with the flow. One of the really downside is how messy it gets, like all the little crummies. It's almost impossible to have a white background. It's so messy though. Look, I try to keep things clean, but there's spots everywhere. I think I'm gonna do a little experiment. I'm gonna try to use, should I try gouache or should I try acrylic paint? I feel like acrylic paint's gonna have like a sheen and gouache is gonna be super matte. I'm gonna try acrylic paint. I'm gonna try to create a background, a white background with acrylic paint to hide all those spots. I don't know if it's gonna work. I think I'm gonna go with gesso as a first layer and then acrylic paint as a second layer. Wish me luck. I'll tell you if it works, because if it doesn't work, I feel like a white background is almost impossible with oil pastel. And I love white backgrounds. Okay, I'm gonna test this.
Oh, what's going on? Oh my god! What's happening? Are you so bored? Are you so bored? What's going on?
By the way, if any of you has tried baby oil before and an old drawing, please leave a comment telling us how it affected the drawing with time. Did the colors change? Did the colors fade? Anything? I will pin that comment so that we all know. Good news, the acrylic paint works. Look at this. It's not fully dry, but it's almost there, but it cleaned everything up. It gives a texture that fits well with oil pastel, I find, and it hides all the little specks that I didn't want. Success! If you want more oil pastel inspiration, you gotta watch this one next. And if you want to see my skills at drawing a realistic portrait, I tried crayons and it worked. You gotta watch this one next.